this one. But anyway, you're here to see these fabulous people, so I'll introduce the host really, and then you can introduce the Quarrymen. So the host for today is Mr. Billy Bragg.
Thank you very much. It's great that you're all here, and I'm just going to talk for a moment because when I came on stage, Colin was in the loo. I don't want to do that. Oh, you're back, great. Because that's the worst thing you can do when you're having your pre-gig ablutions. The last thing the worst thing you want to hear is, "Ladies and gentlemen, Billy Bragg." No. So, it gives me great pleasure to be able to introduce our two comrades from the Quarrymen. Ladies and gentlemen, Well Davis and Colin Hanton are here, yeah!
And he washed his hands.
I hope so. I do hope so.
I didn't actually.
Typical Scouse. So, before we start, I just want to remind everybody we're talking about things that happened 65 years ago. So, if some of the things end up being a bit vague, then we have to forgive these guys because you can understand they lived through the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and all everything else that's gone before. So, I'm going to try and talk a little bit about the Quarrymen, what happened in July 1957. But before I do that, I just want to talk a little bit about, very, very briefly, about Skiffle and where it came from. Skiffle came out of trad jazz. After the Second World War, the young hipsters in the UK were all into New Orleans jazz from around 1900 to 1920. And they learned to play this music. The only way they could learn to play this music was to listen to the old records that they could get hold of. These records were recorded at a time when there was only one microphone in the room. So consequently, the players in New Orleans in the 1920s, to get on the record, blew really hard. They had to do that, otherwise they wouldn't be audible on the record. So the guys in the 1940s and early 50s in the UK who heard these records thought that's how you do it. They blew really hard. They had no sort of ideas about the timbre of the music or anything. They just blew really, really hard. So after about 30 minutes, their lips went. They couldn't play anymore, so they wouldn't lose the audience. They put down their wind instruments, their brass instruments, and they picked up acoustic guitars and they played, broadly speaking, Lead Belly's repertoire. Because they weren't just musicians, they were also kind of musicologists. They were trying to educate people in the UK about African American roots music. And that's what Skiffle is. It's an offshoot of African American roots music that only exists in the UK. It's not an equivalent in the United States of America. The closest thing in the United States of America is rockabilly, that has different roots, but they're similar in style and timing. So Skiffle is a completely indigenous music form, something that was significant in the sense that it introduces the guitar into British pop. Before that, no British people on records are singing, they're just singing with big bands. There's no one playing guitars, but Donegan changes all that, and that's how we get to where we are with these two gentlemen. So, Colin, before we start, I just want to talk a little bit about growing up after the war, because one of the things that I don't think people still understand now is rationing didn't end with the Second World War, did it?
No, I don't think it ended until about 1954.
Yeah, it did. Just after Donegan recorded Rock Island. I mean, what was it like as a kid growing up, not being able to go in a sweet shop and buy what you want? I mean,
well, what we didn't have, we didn't miss. So, we were quite happy with the life that we were living. I mean, playing in bombed out houses was a lot of fun.
Was it strange to sort of not because you couldn't go in cake shops, could you? Not.
Yeah, but I didn't know cake shops. I didn't know sweet shops. So
Well, at the top of the road in Woolton, the top of King's Drive, there was a little ramshackle house run by an old shop run by an old lady called Mrs. Gainey, and my mum used to take us in there for a tiny little packet of dolly mixtures, about half a dozen dolly mixtures. But Mrs. Gainey also had a line in under the counter cakes.
Oh.
And my mum was in there one day, and her name was Alice Gainey, and she said, you know, any cakes today, Alice? And Alice sort of looked at her, and there was a man standing behind her, a policeman. And my mum went, oh dear. Alice said, don't worry, he's in here for some cakes as well.
The rock cake line. I love it. I love it.
Absolutely.
So, with regard to you know, listening to music, were you listening to music before Donegan came along? What sort of music were you hearing on the radio?
Well, we did. Well, obviously radio then was a big thing, but it wasn't so much music. It was the Goon Show and Dick Barton's Special Agents and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
obviously, well, the war songs. I mean, Billy Bragg was one of them.
Of course.
And the big bands from America.
Yeah.
Glenn Miller.
Yeah.
You know.
What about you, Roy? Did you listen to?
Well, my mum and dad were into Victor Sylvester because they liked ballroom dancing.
Yeah.
So Donegan was a bit of a contrast when he came along.
Yeah.
But I mean, there were things like, I mean, 16 Tons was around.
Yeah.
And Frankie Lane singing Cool Water.
Mm-hmm.
And the man from Laramie.
Well, this is all interesting because these are all cowboy
Yeah.
kind of songs, isn't it? And also around that time, independent television appeared in the UK because the BBC had a monopoly on broadcasting after the war of television and also of radio. So if you didn't fit into their idea about what should be on the radio, and as Colin's pointed out, their idea of what should be on the radio was summed up in 2 words, virulent, then you couldn't get it. But when commercial telly came in, they didn't have the money to make their own production, so they bought a lot of series from the United States of America, and a lot of them were cowboy programs, which were aimed at your generation, weren't they?
Yeah, it must have been. Yeah.
And one of the things about the cowboys was, at that time, for some reason, they all sang, didn't they? They all had
Roy
guitars.
Rogers, my four-legged friend, my four-legged friend.
Yeah.
Well, when he got old, it was a three-legged friend.
That's right.
Gene
You
Autry.
can't
Yeah.
use a horse all at once.
Yeah.
And of course, Slim Whitman as well.
Yeah, well,
Who's significant, isn't he?
Slim was very significant, wasn't he, in 1955. He had a huge hit with Rosemary?
Yeah, Rosemary.
Yeah. And what's significant about Slim is, he's the first person to have a #1 single playing a guitar, and also important in the context of what we're talking about, he was left-handed. So consequently, he was an inspiration to one of the other members of the Quarrymen, whose name we won't get to yet. Can you remember the first time you heard Donegan? You heard Rock Island Line on the radio, or what context? Did you hear it on the radio, or did someone play it to you? Or?
I haven't got a clue.
That's fair enough, mate. I can't remember the first time I heard The Clash.
Well, I do remember.
Obviously, I must have heard it somewhere, and I wasn't conscious of it because this was like magic. As you know, Ron said, Victor Sylvester, and suddenly this guy singing Rock Island, and it really just the word rock seemed to resonate with the teenagers.
When did you first see them, Roy?
Well, I was sitting in the back of my dad's car. My mum and dad went to St Helens Market occasionally on a Saturday afternoon, and I was fed up with walking around the market, so I was sitting in the car, and we were outside a record shop. I expect my brother and sister in the car as well, and the door was open, and the sound of Rock Island Line came out of the record shop, and I thought, well, that ain't Victor Sylvester. I'll have some of that. In fact, I still own John Lennon's copy of Rock Island Line, which I bought 2 and 6pence from him.
Wow.
In 1957.
Wow. You can probably get 7 and 6 for that now.
It is.
Maybe even 10 and 6 on a good day.
The hole in the middle was all chipped where he'd been banging it on, and it's all chewed.
Wow.
And one other thing that makes me think it's authentic, some years ago, a guitar of Lennon's and a bag full of 78s went on sale at the Hard Rock Cafe, and the one record that wasn't in it was Rock Island Line. If it had been a Rock Island Line in there, well, that would have smelt the fish, wouldn't it?
It would,
Well,
indeed.
you brought it up, didn't you, sir?
So what, Rock Island Line comes out right at the end of 1955, starts getting in the charts in early 1956, 56, and Donegan goes on tour and plays at the Empire, plays a week at the Empire. Now, at the time we're talking, there's no circuit of rock venues, it just doesn't exist. There's nothing like that. So for someone like Lonnie Donegan, the only way he can tour the UK is to play in the variety halls. And what that means is he's on a bill, he's the top of the bill on a night with a juggler, a couple of comedians, a load of dancing girls, and Donegan will do a couple of sets in the context of that at the end of the first half, at the end of the second half, and he'll do 2 shows a day, a matinee and an evening show, and he'll be in town for a week. And he toured the UK like that. He was in I think in November 1956, he was in Liverpool.
I don't know if you... I was there, yeah, with Joan, my wife was round the back. She was my girlfriend at the time, but yeah, we saw...
Can you give us a bit of a vibe what it was like?
Well, it was just completely different to what we were used to. I mean, they'd smart themselves up then, they had the black dicky balls and all that. But yeah, that was just a great night, yeah.
And Rod, did you...
Well, I was there on January the 1st, 1956, when Chris Barber's band played the Empire, and Donegan, of course, was featured there.
Yeah.
That, of course, was before he went solo, well, not solo, but before he formed his own band and left the Barber band. I've still got the ticket.
Wow. Just a brief cover over this. Donegan was the banjo player in Chris Barber's jazz band. The banjo was in part of the rhythm section, so he would sit at the back of the drum and double bass, while Chris's front line, which would be clarinet, trombone and trumpet, they would stand at the front of the stage. But when they had the breakdown session, which was where they would play the Skiffle songs, Donegan would come from the back of the stage to the front of the stage and play guitar. And it's this moment, I think, did you see this? Did you see him do this? Did you see him play Skiffle? Yeah.
Because he played guitar chords on the banjo.
Wow, I didn't know that.
I spoke to him about that particularly, and yeah, he confirmed. I said, "You know, Lennon played banjo chords on the guitar," and he said, "Yeah, well, he did it."
And it was in the context of a trad jazz record that Chris Barber Jazz Band played. They recorded Rock Island Line in 1954, in July 1954, because they didn't have enough material, so they added a couple of skiffle numbers. Rock Island Line being one of them, although it wasn't released until late 1955. But the significance of this recording of Rock Island Line in that particular week in 1954 is that it was just 8 days after Elvis Presley recorded his first rockabilly song, That's All Right Mama, in Memphis with Sam Phillips. So these two things kind of, by weird osmosis, kind of happen around the same time. So he goes, but once he goes like a rocket, doesn't he?
That's brilliant, yeah.
I mean, it's like the record just gets faster and faster and faster. And if you've been growing up listening to Vera Lynn, it must have been, it must have been incredible. I mean, the gig at the Empire.
Right.
What was do you think that inspired in some way? Because I know McCartney went one night.
Right.
I understand George Harrison went every night. That's what I read. Some people have written a bit about this stuff, we'll get onto that. We'll begin. No, just generally about that stuff. But I mean, there doesn't seem any evidence about John Lennon going. But I understand that the Quarrymen were formed. The idea of forming the group was shortly thereafter. It was
very difficult. Very difficult. We have no concrete evidence, but
about the actual date.
About the date, there are several theories. My theory is there's a guy called Mike Hill from Quarrymen School who in Easter 56 went on an exchange visit to Amsterdam, and while he was there he bought a copy of Little Richard's Long Tall Sally, which you couldn't get in England. And when he came back, there was a bunch of lads from Quarrymen who used to go down to Mossley Hill, buy some chips at the chip shop, go and listen to Mike's record collection. I went once or twice, and Mike, in his book, John Lennon, the boy who became a legend, says that he played Long Tall Sally by Little Richard to John, and it blew him away because he was an Elvis man 100% of the time. And then Mike says, and not long after that, John started his own group. And then there's another bit of evidence, which is Bill Smith, who was the first THS bass player, was a bit older than us, and he could have left school at the end of the 4th year, and his dad was expecting him to finish school in July 56 and start a job. And Bill said, I'd like to stay on another year to try and do some GCEs. And this is what Bill told me. He said, his dad said, okay, I'll support you for another year, but you're not wasting your life playing skiffle with that Lennon. So it's quite possible.
Yeah, it was early as that, yeah.
Yeah. The only annoying thing about it, when I taxed Bill with that, he denied it completely.
That's always the best thing, isn't it? When you say to someone, you know, I always love when you said X, Y, Z, they always say, I never said that. But the best thing to do is say, yeah, I definitely said that. Yeah, no, virulent. I definitely said that.
Well, we actually re-recorded Rock Garden Line with Peter Donovan.
Oh, right,
My
yeah.
son,
Yeah, lovely guy.
Because he wanted to take the record over to America where we were trying to preserve a part of the railroad line.
Yeah.
So we took it over, yeah. We had a good time.
It's good fun.
Yeah, he's a lovely guy. He's a lovely guy, Peter. So the forming of the band, the Quarrymen,
Yeah.
that was the kind of, you were kind of roped into that. You didn't go to the Quarry Bank school, did you?
No, my school was approved, so I was already working, I was an apprentice, so that's how I could afford to buy a very small drum kit from Frank Hesse. So I was friendly with Eric Griffiths, who was John's friend. We were both learning to play guitar, but ended up playing guitar and banjo chords.
Yeah.
Via, John's mum Julie. So as soon as Eric knew that I had a drum kit, he came up to my house and more or less invited me down to his house to meet the rest of I was in the Quarrymen, because I was the only person in the whole world who knew who had a drum kit.
Yeah, it's fair enough. I've known people who join the band because their dad's got a van. That's what I think when I was in punk rock, that was it. He's got a van, he's in. He borrowed his dad's van on the weekend. What about you? How did you get roped in?
Well, again, I was inspired by Donegan, who played banjo and guitar, as we've heard, and so I badgered my parents to buy me one or the other. And we heard that a friend of my uncle's in Denby, who used to play in the dance band, was selling his banjo and his guitar. Now, by the time we found out about it, the guitar had already gone. So we bought the banjo, £5, which was a lot of money in 1956. And I turned up in school the next day and said to my friend Eric Griffiths, I got a banjo yesterday, Eric. He said, do you want to be in a group? Want to be? You had to find somebody with an instrument.
Yeah.
So I said, who's in it? He said, himself on guitar, Pete Shotton on the washboard, Bill Smith on a teacher's bass, and Lennon on guitar.
Yeah.
So they were all in my year at school, and I'd known them all for 4 years or so. So I thought, well, this sounds okay. So yeah, I was in.
Now, your dad took a photo of the Quarrymen, didn't he?
Well, the most famous photograph is not my dad's. It belongs to Jeff Ryan, who was he was in the same year, same class as John actually,
right.
And also lived in Woolton. So that's the really famous photograph.
The 6th of July, 1957, that's Woolton Fete. And that was a day, this is, no, that's the one your dad took, isn't it?
No, that's another one. That's Rosebery Street in June. That
Charlie
one.
Roberts took that one.
We're getting there.
We are getting there. But this is during the fete. You're playing on the back of the lorry, going through the streets.
We're on a lorry there, but it's a stationary lorry. It's not, i.e., it's not moving. It's not selling letters and postcards. It's the stationary lorry.
Yeah.
And that was part of the 750th anniversary celebrations of King John presenting Liverpool with a charter. We knew how to celebrate.
Yeah, of course. Get some teenagers on the back of the lorry playing songs.
So they won the decorated street competition. So this was a celebration party for them winning the decorated street competition in Rosebery Street in Liverpool Lake. A friend of Colin's organised this.
Without breaking your neck, what? Who's in the picture?
Who's in the picture? Well, that's not Paul McCartney for a start.
I dig that.
There's Colin there.
Yep, on the drums. He's got his name on the drums.
He's got his name
on the drums.
He doesn't have to ask matron anymore. He's got his name written on it. Eric Griffiths in the big check shirt. John on the right here in the check shirt with small checks. Len, you can just about see his head, and that's Len's hand going up to the stick of the teacher's base, that white arm.
Yeah.
Then you get Pete Shotton with his back to the crowd here in a jacket.
Yeah.
And then this guy and in the light coloured shirt at the back over to the right is me playing the banjo. So that was Rosebery Street.
What was your repertoire like in those days?
Mostly pinched off Donegan.
Yeah. Wasn't that what every skiffle band was playing?
Pretty well, yeah.
So lead belly songs?
Well, the stuff, the first half of those numbers are probably all knocked off of Donegan, the ones we're going to do tonight.
Yeah, I mean, he was a great sort of conduit for lead belly, wasn't he?
Absolutely,
Yeah. Could you ever get hold of any original lead belly recordings, or was it just not possible?
At the time, no. The nearest, Worried Man Blues was a song which was popular. I think it was Bob Court's skiffle group played it, several skiffle groups did. And a friend of my dad's had given me some Burl Ives 78s.
Right.
And so he got the words for Worried Man Blues off of Burl Ives 78.
All right.
The Quarrymen, Colin doesn't remember that because he was the drummer.
Yeah.
But,
What do I know?
No. Drummers know nothing. Do they? That's what I've heard. So let's see if we can set a scene on the 6th of July. You're playing Church Fate.
Yes.
And in the context of that, is it Ivan Vaughan brings along a friend of his? Yeah. So tell us a little bit about Ivan and his connection and his friend.
Well, Ivan was a good friend of John's, really. And he also a friend of Paul's, so he thought he'd bring Paul along to the Fate to see John's skiffle group, which is what he did. And then he came to the field. Paul reckons he saw us on the field in the afternoon doing the Del Viking song, Come Go With Me. Because John we weren't always able to get all the words because you'd listen to Radio Luxembourg, Sunday night or something, and you'd scribble them down. So John made up the line like, come go with me down to the penitentiary. It sounded American.
Yeah. Sounds very clever.
Paul reckoned saw that and thought, well, that's clever, like.
Yeah.
And then in the evening when we went up to the church hall, I went home for my tea. And he brought Paul over to officially meet John.
So was you there when he got home for his tea? Were you around when Paul turned up?
no, I went home for my tea.
Has anybody not gone home for their tea?
We were in a Q&A in America some years ago, and I was the first person to be interviewed, and whoever it was interviewed and said, now you're all here, you can tell us exactly what happened. So I was like, well, I went home for my tea, and Colin, I went home for my tea. So the next time...
So, what did you have for your tea?
Well, the next time we were asked, I said, I went for a pee at the most exciting moment in rock and roll history. And now, if you go to St. Peter's Church, there's a painting on the wall done by an American guy called Eric Cash, and it's Ivan Vaughan introducing John to the Quarrymen. So Eric said to me, look, there's all the Quarrymen there, there's Ivan Vaughan, your banjo is leaning on the chair. I've not put you in the picture because I was there when you told everybody you were in the bathroom at the time. So don't joke with Americans, that's the point.
When I was a teenager when we played, we always looked at the school band, we always looked at their shoes.
Yeah.
Playing, that kind of
in Jeff's photograph, I think I'm looking down.
Yeah. So somebody had some recording equipment there, didn't they, on the day? Made a recording of the gig.
Well, there's a friend of ours called Bob Molyneux, whose mum and dad used to run the ironmongers in Woolton, had a tape recorder that evening, as far as we know, right?
Yeah.
And he recorded a dozen tracks of the Quarrymen, and later, to his eternal regret, recorded over 10 of them. So we only had 2. And just think, I mean, he sold 2 in 1995 to EMI for £79,000.
Right.
He's had another 10, goodness knows. So it is possible that it was recorded at a different time, but we haven't got any proof of that. So the current story is that he recorded it there. Because I've actually heard the original recording down at EMI Studios, and there's people saying, like, are you a dancing girl, and stuff like this. So it's quite likely that it was actually at St. Peter's at the dance, rather than in the mill bar, which is the alternative theory.
But it's the day, isn't it? That's the that's for £79,000.
Because we've got 3 ladies, I think, in the audience here who are actually there on the 6th of July.
Wow.
So anything... Well, there you go.
You didn't go home for your tea, did you?
You didn't go home for your tea. You did. Right. Came back afterwards. Did you go to the dance in the evening? There you are.
Did you see anyone there with a tape machine? That's what we want to know.
And
Oh yeah.
then they had a couple of Alsatians and a man in a boiler suit with a padded right arm, and the dog would savage his arm.
Fabulous.
This was to put off people like John Lennon from becoming villains. In fact, John joined the police, of course.
Did he?
He joined the police. Yeah, he told me that the big attraction, he'd seen the brochure with all these police cadets playing snooker and stuff, so he thought that'd be all right for a couple of years. So he did that, but when he actually became a policeman, he was sent to Garston on night duty, and he said, I used to cower in a shop doorway holding me truncheon firmly. I realised it wasn't a job for me.
No.
Oh, that's sketch photograph.
Yeah. Let's do that clip, mate, if you can play it.
Can you recognise the drummer?
Yeah, definitely put it on the side.
Sped it. That was recorded in St Peter's Church
Yeah.
Hall, and you know what the acoustics are
I
like.
do.
St Peter's
Not
Church
only
Hall.
not only do I know what the acoustics like, but you've got to remember that was recorded on at a gig where only the vocals were mic'd up. That's why you're only the vocals and the drums. None of the guitars are mic'd up or plugged in, or no one's got an electric guitar. They haven't been invented in England yet. No one's got one. Hank Marvin's first one is on its way. But so when you came back from your dinner, was McCartney still there?
Tea, it's called. In
Tea, yeah. I'm from the south. It's dinner. Yeah, was McCartney still
He
there?
was actually.
You didn't meet him on the day?
I didn't meet him on the day, no.
I have read that he stayed for the evening performance.
Yeah.
So was who wrote it, Rob?
Well, exactly, Colin.
Some idiots do write all kinds of rubbish.
They do.
No.
You never know whose version is going to come to the surface, do you, in these things? Well, I read somewhere. But when Paul was integrated into the band, was that something that you thought was, you had a bit of a say in, or was that
Yeah,
purely
no,
John's?
actually it was, it was 2 weeks later actually. Because we were rehearsing in my house, Hayscroft Road. And Ivan Vaughan was there. I can remember him, see him even now, he was sitting just to the right of the fireplace in the armchair. The lads were by the front window, and I had the drums right at the back, keep the noise down. And we played a number, and then I got up to walk towards them, and as I was passing Ivan Vaughan, he sort of got really angry, which is unusual for him. He said, I can't believe you lot have introduced you to a great guitarist, you can't make your flipping minds up.
Right.
So that sort of galvanised John and the rest of them, and he said, well, and then Pete got and said, he's right, John, he's not in our group, he'll be in somebody else's group. So John said, well, what do you think? And Eric said, okay, and, I said, I'm fine with that, no problem. So he said, okay, we'll have him in our group. And then it was forgotten about. Nobody said who's going to tell him. Nobody said if he got his phone number.
No, he's just in the group. How did he find out?
Well, a week later, he came up on his bike up Vale Road, and he happened to bump into Pete Shotton.
Yeah.
He stopped to say hello, and Pete Shotton said, oh, the lads were impressed with what you did the other week. He said, do you want to be in our group? So he thought for a minute, he said, okay. So he was in.
Cool. And how did you feel about the new guitar player?
Well, that was the end of my career.
Was it?
Yeah, if only I'd have been a decent guitarist, McCartney wouldn't have stood a chance. I was a
You
banjo
should have
player.
suggested he played the bass.
Well, it was the end of the 5th year at school, basically, and as I was saying earlier, Pete Shotton left Quarrybank to join the police or become a police cadet. Lennon went to art school. Eric Griffiths went to become an apprentice engineer at Napier's or something like that. So basically the group left me.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'd done, but they are. But it was becoming a rock and roll group, and you can't have a banjo in a rock and roll group. And I hated rock and roll. And Pete Shott, the washboard player, dropped out about the same time, so they had, the makings of a rock and roll group. They kept Len on because he was on the T-chest bass, because again, you couldn't buy an electric bass and an amplifier, which was necessary. So, but it was becoming a rock and roll outfit, and that didn't bother me in the slightest.
But didn't the Quarrymen play the first night at the Cavern Club? Did I read something?
Oh, I don't know if we played the first night of the Cavern Club, to be honest with you. I know we played an early game, but I don't know if I couldn't...
You remember playing at the Cavern? Because it was initially, when the Cavern Club opened, it was a trad jazz club. It was a trad jazz boom happened around the same time as Skiffle was happening for teenagers. Trad jazz was happening for sort of people in the early 20s, and it was quite a big deal. So a number of the Marquee Club, the 100 Club in London, and in Liverpool, the Cavern opened as a trad club. And can you remember playing the Cavern with the Quarrymen?
I do. Well, I was a member of the Cavern anyway, because I did like jazz, I did like the jazz band. But yeah, I remember going there, but the guy who owned it, Dr. Sittner,
Alan Sittner.
Yeah.
Well, his father, Dr. Sittner, was a member of the Lee Park Golf Club, where Nigel Wally, who was our manager, was an apprentice professional golfer, believe it or not. I never thought there was such a thing.
No.
What an apprentice to have. But anyway, he must have asked Dr. Sittner whether our band or the group could play in the Cavern scene. He said, no, could we play in the Cavern? And he said, well, I'll bring them to the golf club first, at the dance night, and we'll just see what they're like. So we turned up at the Lee Park Golf Club, and we did a little tiny set at the side of the big band that was set up while they were having a break. And I had my drum kit, and then some lady came out of the crowd and pulled a chair alongside me, grabbed hold of my left arm, and wouldn't let go, so I just... So Lemon said, well, Colin's occupied, let's just carry on.
Well, I remember that gig quite well too, because our uniform was black jeans and white shirts, very, very imaginative. And I'd asked my mum and dad for some money to buy some black jeans, and they said, no, only working men wear jeans, you're not having money to buy jeans. And so I complained to my friend Mike Rice. He said, oh, I've got a second-hand pair, an old pair you can have. I should have smelt a rat there and then, but I didn't. So he sold me this second-hand pair of jeans for 7 and 6pence, you see.
Right.
And just before we went on stage, the zip split.
Oh!
And so I spent the set crouching behind the banjo, thanking the Lord I wasn't a ukulele player. So I remember that particularly well.
So, also around that time, you made a recording, didn't you? You went to...
Well, the band had moved on then. It was, by the time, you mean the Percy Phillips recording?
Yeah, Percy Phillips, that was a little bit later, was it?
Well, that was 58.
Yeah.
But by then it was John Paul George and
Right.
myself.
Yeah.
John Dufflow, who's a friend of Paul's, he was invited in to play the piano because Paul was insisting on, despite all the danger, he had a little piano solo.
Paul, this is a song that Paul wrote?
This is a song that Paul wrote, yes. We rehearsed that. Well, we did the Buddy Holly's That'll Be the Day, which was one of our staple ones. We used to like that one.
By now, Rod was right, you have turned into a rock and roll band.
We had moved on.
Yeah. But was that happening to a lot of skiffle bands, making that transition?
I think it was actually, I mean, the swinging blue jeans became the blue jeans all the way around. I can't quite
the way around. But I think we've also got a clip of John Dufflow talking about being part of that recording, I think.
Yeah.
He was there, and I think he's given us a little clip of the experience of taking part in that recording. If you can find that for us.
Was that recently done?
I think it must be, if you haven't seen it.
No.
Percy asked us if we wanted to record onto tape first, and then from tape to disc. Using the tape first was more expensive, so we decided to go direct to disc. John and Paul stood together nearer to the microphone than George, so their voices would be picked up. We ran through both songs a couple of times so that Percy could get a level on his mixer. John sang lead on both songs with Paul harmonising. We cut That'll Be the Day, the A-side first, and as this song was in our usual set, we rattled it off without any problem. In Spite of All the Danger, on the other hand, is a slow, rambling song, which in its original form goes on for just over 3.5 minutes. Now, when you remember that this was almost twice as long as the average song of the day, you'll understand why Percy, looking all professional in his headphones, started getting a bit agitated as we sailed past the 3-minute mark with no suggestion that we were getting to the end of the song. Percy must have been wondering where it was all going to end and wishing that he'd taken the afternoon off. But after 3 minutes and 30 seconds, as disaster loomed, the song ended with George's 7th chord.
So you've been left at school playing your banjo. It's all turned to rock and roll. Where does it end for you, Colin? How do you end up not going to Hamburg with the mad people?
Well, I had an apprenticeship, which back in the day was a 5-year apprenticeship.
Yeah.
And my dad had been a fireman during the war, badly injured on the docks, he made mitts. And he was kept on, when he came out of hospital recovery, he was kept on as a fireman, but only answering the phones. So of course after the war, when they reorganised, he was surplus to requirements. So he left the fire brigade without a trade. So he was always banging on to me about an apprenticeship. So when I left school, I went to work in a furniture factory, and one day they, just basically as a labourer, for 6 months, but the manager came up and said, "We've noticed you're working well, we'd like to give you an opportunity to be an upholsterer. Would you like to have an apprenticeship?" So I said, "Oh yes, please." And then went into the work, went to talk to the guys that I was working with as a labourer, and I said, what's an upholsterer?" An apprenticeship, that was my dad's favourite thing, so.
Makes a lot of
So
sense.
if I'd stayed on, and they said we're going to Hamburg, I couldn't have left there.
No.
That. So, and I'd already had a bit of a row. When you weren't going anywhere, you were getting on my nerves. So. Yeah,
that's fair enough. And what about you? Well, did you remain involved in the Skiffle thing in Liverpool?
Well, my brother and I decided that we needed a guitar because there was more potential with the guitar than the banjo. And again, we pestered my mum and dad says, "You've got a Hornby train set on the top of the wardrobe there, gathering dust. Why don't you sell that?" Because these days it would have been worth a considerable amount. So we sold that and we bought a Spanish guitar, and we realised it should be amplified, so we had an earphone carbon mic off a headset sellotaped onto the guitar, and the back of our radio set, or rather wireless set, actually had a jack socket. So we played this through the jack socket, and I played with some guys from Quarrymen School playing sort of jazz stuff. And so I would go to a gig with a Spanish guitar over one shoulder and an old wireless set under the other.
It is crazy. I think I read somewhere Donegan had a microphone from a tank driver's mic that stuck on his banjo, a throat mic on the banjo to pick up
an alternative
throat mic. Yeah.
Good.
Incredible. So we haven't got a huge amount of time left, but I'd love to throw open some Q&A if that's all right with you guys. Do you mind that? Can we put our slides up so I can see people's quizzical faces? And I don't know if you have a microphone. Brilliant. So if anybody has any questions they'd like to put, let's start with this bloke down here because he's the closest, and I'll come up to you there, mate.
Good evening. Do you know where the original recording is of that you made in Kensington, Liverpool?
Yes, Paul McCartney has it. John Lowe kept it for about 20 years. In fact, when Paul's performing now, he does a little cameo in front of the stage. They bring the curtain down, and he comes forward with his guitarist, and the drummer. They wheel a tiny little drum kit on the side of the drummer, and they do In Spite of All the Danger. But we all had it for a short period of time, and then it ended up with John. He didn't give it back to anybody, just stuck it in the drawer and looked after it. But when he decided, to make the fact be known that there was a record out there, I think he talked to a newspaper and said, you know, there's a record out. So that, I think the newspaper came out on the Sunday. On the Monday, John Duffalo's mum had a phone call off Paul to say, I need Duff's phone number.
Yeah.
I need to talk to him now.
Yeah.
Send the boys round.
Yeah. So there's a chap up the back there. Let's have the gentleman up the 2 rows on the back there. He was up next, and I'll come to you there, mate. Over there as well. Can you get further away in the corner there? Yes, sir.
Good evening, gents. Thanks for your time. It's a pleasure to hear you speak. I just wanted to ask, what were your favourite memories of, or what was your favourite memory of John, and then separately, perhaps your favourite memory of Paul?
There's no favourite memory. It was just a good time, and we were just kids having a lot of fun. You know, I haven't really got a favourite memory. I remember going to John's house one time as he was just leaving, and he said, I'm going down to see my mum, so he said, do you want to come with me? So we went down to Julie's, and she got a banjo out, and she taught him like Maggie May, which for the mum in those days was very risky. It was all about a prostitute in Liverpool.
Yeah.
I mean, most mothers would have been horrified. But
Yeah.
this is it, John. Maggie May.
All right.
Sorry,
Go on.
The best memory of John, although I wasn't in the class at the time, him and Pete decided that our scripture teacher wouldn't be satisfied until he had a class full of vicars. Right, so Pete's mum had a grocer's shop, and they found some white cardboard in the back of the shop, and they made 32 dog collars. What happened was, he handed out all these dog collars just before the lesson started, and Mr. McDermott came in, sat down, looked at his documents, and looked up and found he had 32. That was good. I mean, a lot of the time, what things John did were absolutely terrible, and but sometimes he really hit the spot and got something really very fun.
Cool. Yes, sir.
Well, I imagine it must have been quite a strange feeling to see your old mates sort of, I don't know, end of 62 going into 63, sort of started to appear on the TV and on the radio. Did you ever get used to that, and how did it feel sort of over the next sort of 5 or 6 years when they sort of took over everything? Did you ever sort of, I mean, that must have been a very strange feeling back in Liverpool to be looking at your old mates sort of conquering everybody.
Yeah, I just got totally sick of it, to be honest.
Yeah. I heard they got sick of it as well.
Every time you open the paper, there they are getting the hair cut or the nails fixed or something. You couldn't see a newspaper without them.
I bet.
I mean, the first time we actually saw them, they were on Granada television, you know, the tea time thing.
Yeah.
I'd come home from work, television was on, and suddenly they were announcing this new band from Liverpool, the Beatles, and played. I thought, what the hell are they doing up there? But no, I was quite pleased with them. They went through a lot of, it wasn't all good, believe me. You know, they went through a lot of rubbish to get where they got.
I was living from 60 to 63 I was at university away from Liverpool, so didn't hear anything about them at all, really. But one time they appeared, I was with some friends from University Folk Song Society, and we had to go to Newmarket because some friends of ours wanted us to run their club. But I remember seeing the queues of young ladies queuing up to buy tickets for the Beatles. But after that, I was living in Germany, in a town ending in the word Berg, but it wasn't Hamburg, it was Regensburg. And I asked my students, have they ever heard of the Beatles? No, never heard of them. Wow. So I got the occasional phone call from my mum and dad saying, oh, they're not doing too badly at the moment.
Right. And there's one there woman here. Put your hand up, yeah. Oh, same question. Okay, well, in that case, we'll go over there, and then I've forgotten you. Mate, I've got you. We'll take this.
You just make me crisscross across the auditorium. That's all right, Bill. That's fine. I'm a fit man.
What am I doing, mate? I've got total control over you, mate. I'm having the most of it.
Colin, do you still have that drum kit that you played?
Trying to make it off, I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't actually. I did save it. I put it on top of the wardrobe for 40 years. I never touched it for 40 years until 1997, when a lady in Liverpool called Jean Catswell approached us individually to see if we would get back together to do a one-off concert to raise some money for St. Peter's Church Hall. I said, oh my goodness, I've played for 40 years. You know, it wasn't particularly good 40 years ago. I don't know to do it, but the phone started going. I think Rod phoned me, and in the end, Pete Shotton, who was pretty good at cutting, well, he used to say he was the best thing at cutting through the crap.
Yeah.
That's how he became a successful businessman. Cut through the crap. He said, look, why don't we all meet up in Liverpool and see what happens? So we said, okay, so Len said we could use his house. So Eric was living in Edinburgh. He went out and bought a guitar because he didn't even have a guitar. Rod came up from London with a guitar now, not a banjo. TCS bass and a washboard, I think. Pete Shotton came up from the Isle of Wight or wherever he was living, I don't know. Ben was in Liverpool, and I was in, obviously, Liverpool. I got my drums out, dusted them down, given them a bit of a wipe over, and we all went to Len's house. You know, I think I took some cartons of beer along, again, just to
vibe.
And we just sat up in Len's house and sort of, what did we do? And we go, you know, rock out of line and Lost John and stuff. And then we thought about Lost John, and Pete Shotton said, well, you know, John isn't here, but let's do what we used to do. So we just started playing, and it was just, we were all sort of 18, 19 lads again.
Yeah.
It was just absolutely magical. So Pete Shotton said, if we could do that on the day, people understand it's a charity, we'd be fine. So we said, okay, we'll do it. But as the day was approaching, I thought, my goodness, you know, I'm going to be on the back of a wagon, I'm going to be doing the grand dance in the evening. We've only had a little meeting, so I phoned Rod and said, Rod, we've got to have at least one rehearsal. You know, we can't just go on with nothing.
Yeah.
He said, well, have a talk to the vicar, see if we can have the hall on the Friday night. So I spoke to the vicar. He said, yeah, you can use the hall on the Friday night. So Friday night, I turned up again with more beer. And we just had a sort of rehearsal.
I'd forgotten that.
In the St. Peter's, the
forgotten.
little hall. Anyway, we decided we'd do it. So on the day, there was a wagon there. You know, we got on the back of the wagon. We went round the village as we did, you know, 40 years ago. Yeah. And we were dropped off in the field, and we did the field in the open air. And we were coming off the stage, and people were asking for autographs. Autographs?
Yeah.
It's incredible. And somebody said to me, have you got a CD? And I said, a CD? I said, have you just heard that one? But about 2 weeks later, Eric phoned me up. He said, what do you think about making a CD, Colin? I said, oh, it's a great idea. Put the phone down. I said to my wife, Joan, don't forget it.
Yeah.
By the time he cost it out, a couple of weeks later, he phoned me up and said, are you free on a Sunday? So I said, yeah, what are we doing, Eric? He said, oh, I booked a recording studio. So we went down there, and we had the cheek to record a video, you know, a CD. So that was the start of it, really. And then, you know, the phone started going. It wasn't long before somebody phoned up and said, do you want to come to Cuba for a week?
Why?
So we thought, okay.
Fly me to Cuba, or I'll play the drums.
They said, I'm sorry, we can't pay you.
Yeah.
Bummer.
Yeah.
But he said, we can fly you out there, we put you up in a hotel and we'll look after yourself. They flew us out there, they put us up in the Hotel National in Havana, you know.
Yeah.
So you walk around this place, walk down staircases, and there's photographs of, you know, George Raft and Frank Sinatra and all those American stars going up and down the same.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so it was good. And then on the Wednesday night, we performed in what they call the American Theatre.
Yeah.
So we did our show, and then the following morning, they put us on a bus and took us down the coast to Valadero, a modern hotel right on the beach. So we had a great time in Valadero. We didn't get paid, like, they flew us home.
Yeah, they didn't fly us home, didn't they?
Yeah. How about our friend over in the corner who we've all forgotten about? Like, you're up.
Always in the corner.
Yeah.
I just wondered, when was the last time you ever seen any of the guys? And did you actually see them after they made it in the 60s? Did you actually have any contact with them?
Not an awful lot, no. In 2018, I was 80, and he was playing the Echo Arena on my birthday, which was the 12th of December. And Frida Kelly, who we know, she knew it was my 80th birthday, so she got my wife Joan and I VIP tickets to go to the show and go backstage and say hello to Paul, you know. So I met Paul. It was a tentative man hug.
Yeah.
He's a vegetarian, there's not a lot of him. And you know, I said this is my wife, and he said to Joan, "Oh, you married a quarryman?" She said, "No, he married me." He said, "And this is Nancy, you know, my wife," and that. And then he said, "Our original drummer's out there, Colin, where are you?" So the spotlight went on me, you know, and give me a shout out. So that was really nice.
That is lovely. Yeah.
But I must say, I wrote a book some years ago, and I plugged the book.
You can plug your book, mate.
I realised, well, it's strange, isn't it? I wasn't getting any younger, so I thought, I'm going to do a book, you know, I've got to get it done. And I was sick and tired of reading books by other people.
Yeah.
They were probably only 20, 30, and they were writing stuff that they read in other books that wasn't true, but because somebody had written it, they'd written a book. So I did write a book with Colin Hall, who's the curator at Mendip's, John's house, because he can write double. So got him involved.
Yeah.
And the book's been out for a while. It's called Prefab. But there was a guy from America, Mark Bailey, who's a lawyer in Florida.
Yeah.
He came over to Penny Lane to meet me once, a few years ago now, to buy the book. He went back home, and 2 weeks later he phoned me up. He said, "I think this would make a good documentary film."
All right.
So after all this time, the film is now finished. We had it finished for a while, but Paul was in it.
Right.
And we couldn't do anything with it until Paul had seen the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because if he didn't like something, he would have taken himself out.
Yeah.
He's feeling it, he likes it, and he's given us his blessing.
Okay.
So it's finished now. So hopefully,
We will be seeing it.
We will be seeing it. Yeah.
Cool. That'll be great.
Prefab. The gentleman over there asked me about my drums. I did keep them for a long time. In fact, the first record we made, I did use my drums, my original drum kit. But then, I mean, we were over 40 years old, you know, so we thought we needed something a bit different. So the Beatles story took them for a long time, doing the Beatles story. And then I started getting messages from a guy in Canada who wanted to buy them, and I didn't want to sell them.
Yeah.
He said, "Don't you want to buy a new car?" I said, "Well, I just bought a new car, so no, I don't need another one."
No.
But he did pester me, and then he knew we were playing in New York. So he said, "I'll come down and have a talk to you, you know." So he came down, and I said, "Honestly, I don't need to sell them. I don't really want to sell them yet." So he said, "Well, what would make you get rid of them, like use them on?" So I gave him some stupid figure, you know, and he said, "Okay." We shook hands and went home, and then about 2 weeks later we got this letter off him. It said, here's a cheque for £4,000 as a deposit. You agreed to sell your drums to me." So I stuck it on the pegboard, and then another £4,000, stuck it on the pegboard. Another £4,000 out, stuck that on the pegboard. And my wife just blew her top. She said, "For God's sake," she said, "rip it up, tell him you're not selling them, or put them in the bank." You've got £12,000 sitting on the pegboard. I put it in the bank and just waited for all the rest of the money to come in. In the end, I said, "Okay, they're yours now." So I'm sorry about that, we've got some money.
Well, this is before, you have to remember this is before eBay was invented. What about you, Rob? When did the last time you saw any of the guys at the band?
Well, I saw John in Easter 62. I bumped into him in Liverpool in Clayton Square, and he asked me what I was doing. So I was at university at the time, and I got very interested in bluegrass music, and I started playing, banjo, guitar, mandolin, a bit of fiddle. He said, "Look, pity you can't play drums." He said, "You could come to Hamburg and play drums for us." Now, I'm not sure it was a serious offer, but my mother would have been waiting on the White Cliffs of Dover with a machine gun. So that was the last time I saw John. I only remember seeing Paul once very briefly in 1957 when we were practicing at Aunt Mimi's, but I did see him in 2005. My wife and I used to do quite a lot of windsurfing, and we were down in Hove Marina, where Paul had a house. I believe it's gone to some lady he knew once. And, so we were waiting for the wind to blow, and a friend of mine said, "I've just seen Paul McCartney going for a walk with his dog." So I thought, well, I can't let this go by, so I sort of doubled back into the sunken garden, and there was a man with a hoodie on and a very large scruffy dog talking to two people who were officials from the windsurfing competition. So they know me. They said, "Hey Rod, see who this is?"
Yeah.
So I walked over to Paul and shook his hand, and he said, "Who are you then?" So I said, "I'm the bloke who you replaced me in the Quarrymen in 1957. Oh, he said, "that's going back a bit, isn't it?" And we had a brief chat, and they were trying to persuade him to present the prizes for the windsurfing competition, but he wasn't going to be there. And then eventually his dog got all restless, and off they went. So that's the only time I've met him.
I've never met any of them, so this is the closest I'll ever get. So I'm sure it's the closest you'll ever get as well, ladies and gentlemen. So please give it up for the Quarrymen.